Welcome back to Editors Roundtable. Well, it's almost December, and we'll start talking about a Santa Claus rally. And I did a quick analysis of the last 20 years or so, and December is the best month in terms of returns on an average for the last 20 years. It mildly outpaces July as well as September. Closer on 3.2% has been the average returns that we've seen in the last 20 years. The question is, will Santa come to town in December 2022? And for the last 20 years, actually hasn't really disappointed too much, because out of the 20 years, only 4 times have we seen December ending in a negative territory. And it's not been too bad, actually, a couple of times, just around 0.5% lower, while 2011 it was down by closer around 4%. Well, in terms of, the last 7 years or so, there hasn't been any disappointment. So the last time we saw a sharp downtake was in 2014. And this data actually about December being very, very good is because it gets skewed of 2003. And I was really not tracking markets at all at that time, because that time I think we had a 15-16% return. So will Santa come to town this December 2022? History suggests yes. Let's see whether or not it does happen.
Will you dress up like Santa like you did 3 or 4 years back?
Many years ago, yeah. 4 years ago.
I still remember that.
4 years ago, lovely times. Maybe I'll have to do it for the kids this time around.
Do it this time. Okay, so that's a promise. Nigel will do it this time.
Okay, all right. Well, let's welcome our guest then. Joining us on the show to share his insights is Venugopal Garre, Managing Director at Bernstein. Hi, Venugopal. Thanks so much for joining in on the show. Well, I believe you've come back from a trip in the United States. What's the sense of the Indian markets? We have been tom-tomming about us being the big outperformers. How is the mood with regard to the Indian markets?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. I was listening to your conversation the last 10 minutes, and it's interesting to see, an amazingly bullish picture being painted around, what we are seeing in the markets today. And the more interesting thing is that, I spent close to about 2 weeks out meeting a lot of foreign investors, emerging market funds. And I think it's very, very clear that even from their perspective, they do see India as a bright spot within the overall emerging market universe. So that's a very clear, sort of a feedback. The other important thing is the fact that most acknowledge that valuations are extremely rich, but at the same time, there is a willingness to disregard valuations. Now, I'll explain, as we discuss about what that actually means, but that's an important variable. The third thing which I could probably figure out is that there is no rush in terms of wanting to pour in money into India. So that's another important aspect that if you want to think about it, valuation still somewhere down the line is limiting the ability of investors to, sort of put in a lot of money, because a lot of the outperformance that we have seen to a large extent has already happened in the year relative to other global end markets. So positive picture, but it doesn't look like people would disregard valuations, even though they might be saying so.
Okay, Venugopal, hi, good evening. The other key talking point has been all these new age and the platform companies and the kind of selling that we have seen in some of them. Though a couple of them have bounced back this week. Are you tracking them? What's your view?
See, I think, this is, if you were to purely put it from a perspective of the flow aspect, I don't think the flow aspect is done yet, right? Because a lot of these consumer tech companies, or platform companies, as you say, are going to see a complete churn in their capital structure, because those who were there originally, got in with different expectations, different timings, they have different, sort of thinking about how much returns they would want. But look at this in a context of the overall global consumer tech end market as well. I don't think it's any different. So in that sense, we're actually seeing a lot of these potential exits coming in from other emerging market consumer tech companies also, which may have listed in the last 12 to 18 months. So Southeast Asia is a classic example of that, where we are actually starting to see that as well happen here. So this is more of a global sort of a trade rather than, anything specific to India. The second thing I would argue that, look, consumer tech companies in general in India are still costlier than most of the world. But then there is a growth angle as well, because, penetration rates are still lower. But at the same time, the discovery is still going on as to whether some of these are really viable business models, whether they're going to be, providing potential long-term growth opportunities. Will they come back to a profit or not?
Right.
So if you think about it, I guess the investor trade right now is, if you can demonstrate profitability, those companies could potentially at least see one leg of re-rating. And so that's the race which is going on right now.
Venu, in terms of feedback from investors, which are the sectors foreigners were most excited about? And don't name banks and financials, we already know they are. But what else as we head into the new year?
Yeah. So basically, what you said is what was the number one sector. So in the context of India, I guess financial sector is seeing a lot of interest. The other smaller sector for, to an extent where I felt was surprised to see a lot of questions was on real estate. So there is a belief that real estate cycle will strengthen in India from here, and hence one should look for opportunities. And that's another sector where we saw a lot of interest. So in the other part is, outside of this, I'd probably argue that, look, why we have been arguing against consumption slowdown and potential risk to consumption, I didn't really see investors being that negative. So I would probably sound out these two areas as where I probably still saw relatively higher interest.
What about manufacturing sector? That's again a space where there is a lot of promise now. Investors are looking to buy that space. With your interaction with clients, is that a sector which excites a lot of global investors now?
Oh yes, you're right. The reason why I didn't mention that is because there are very few investable opportunities in a pure play EMS setup, which is or a manufacturing setup. So in that, from a long term or a medium term thinking perspective, I think more or less people are convinced globally that India would be one of the alternatives outside of China, right? So now, unfortunately, in the last 2-3 years, we haven't proven that that it's going to be meaningfully beneficiary for us because COVID also sort of distorted and delayed a lot of plans, and also we have competition from a lot of other emerging markets wanting to tap in that opportunity. But 3 years back, there was still this skepticism that if India would even sort of live up to this opportunity that is coming up. But at least that debate is no longer there. Now it comes to a question of how to play that. You need to see potentially more listings come our way, to gather that opportunity. That's where it is now. You can't really play that right now through industrials, for example, a sector thinking that if manufacturing is going to come in, then there's going to be a meaningful capex. I think all that story is still a couple of years away. But if you see what has happened is a lot of these pure play cap goods industrial companies have actually seen a huge rally. So that was probably being also played as a quasi play for manufacturing. But I think we still need to see more listings to happen, which is probably going to excite more people in the medium to long term.
Okay, all right. Thanks so much, Venugopal, for stopping by and giving us your view on the markets as well as how's India panning out in terms of the rest of the world. Well, on that note, though, we'll have to wrap up on this edition of Editors Roundtable. Thanks so much for watching.